And welcome to our community. I'm Susie Thomas. Very excited this morning to be welcoming Carol Warther Moreland from the Warther Museum, the internationally known Warther Museum, here with us this morning. Good morning, Carol.
Good morning, Susie.
All right. Well, your middle name is Warther. That means that's your maiden name. You're a member of the family?
Yes. My grandfather is the one who did all the carvings. And he passed away in 1983, so I was 16, so I remember him well.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's talk about him. Ernest Mooney Warther. I know that he was on the Johnny Carson show. He became quite famous for these carvings, but he started out as a simple man, didn't he? Not much education?
Right. He only had a second grade education. Took him 4 years to get through 2 grades because he could only go to school in the wintertime when the weather was bad.
Why was that?
The rest of the time he was herding the family cow out to pasture, and he also gathered neighbors' cows and earned a penny a cow a day to help the family with income because his father had passed away when he was 3.
Where did his interest in these amazing carvings come from?
Well, when he was out herding the cows, he found a knife on a dusty trail, and he started carving fence posts, trees, whatever he could find because he was bored out in the fields with nothing to do. And eventually that grew into a hobby that lasted him a lifetime.
I'm thinking of the amazing carving where everything's moving, but he had worked in some type of manufacturing, some
Yes.
type of mill, and he recalled from memory each of the characters that were also working there. And can you describe the piece I'm talking about?
Yes, he worked for 24 years in the American Sheet and Tin Plate in Dover. And then it was torn down in 1931, and in 1952 he carved it from memory. And a lot of his fellow workers came to see it, and they said everything was right in place the way it was. And he carved a lot of his workers doing their own unique habits. Like one guy would fall asleep every day after he'd get the engines running. And another man always ate the same lunch every day of Swiss cheese and rhubarb pie.
Oh
so
my
he has him
gosh.
sitting on a bench eating lunch. And there was a guy back in the coal bin that was cleaning the dust out of his throat with a drink.
Oh my gosh.
He got everybody in there doing something.
If they would have known he was paying such close attention, they would have been watching their P's and Q's a little better, probably.
Probably.
So funny. So what you're saying, though, is that all the carving, this was a hobby. He was also working full-time and raising a family, and then just doing these amazing carvings on the side?
Yes, it was just a hobby. He liked to get up at 3 or 4 in the morning and carve for 4 or 5 hours before anybody else was up to disturb him, and he'd get a lot done, and then the rest of the day was for work and family.
He moved from the fence posts to some amazing materials that he would work with. Tell us some of the things that we'll find at the Warther Museum.
His carvings are all done out of either walnut and ivory combination or ebony and ivory combination. And then in his later years, he did some all ivory carvings.
And where would he get these?
The ivory tusk and the ebony he found from importers in New York City.
And so this was all legal at the time that he was carving?
Yeah, back then it was illegal to bring the ivory in. Nowadays it's not.
So can you take us sort of on a tour of the Warther Museum when we walk in, before we get to the knife and gift shop? We go in and we get a chance to see the amazing trains seem to capture his imagination, didn't they?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about what we will see when we go to the Warther Museum.
You start out, the first thing you see is in our lobby is his workshop where he did all the carvings. And we've left everything there original, all his tools and equipment. He just had a little fireplace for heat. And then we move into the first room, which has the model of the steel mill in there. And that's all mechanized and moves. And then you go into the main exhibit hall, which shows the evolution of the steam engine from 250 BC up to the 1940s. And he has about 64 carvings in there that show the progression of steam.
Just incredible. So
Yes.
then did he start to create, am I remembering this right, that he started to create his own knives?
Yes. He couldn't find knives that would stay sharp, so he created his own knives. And that became his living after he left the steel mill, is then he made knives and sold those for income, and so his carving still remained a hobby.
Which are still available today, right? We can buy
Yes.
Warther knives. What's exceptionally unique about them?
they're a high carbon tool steel. They're not stainless, so they'll keep a much better edge.
And what I noticed too is that there's some kind of like a swirl pattern. Is that something that he
That's
made
our
up?
Yeah, he put that on there. It's our trademark, and it also doesn't show water spots on your blade if you don't dry it properly.
Oh, well, now I know that. Can you put these in the dishwasher?
No.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
My husband wins that contest we have going. So,
Okay.
all right, I'll stop. It had to be so fun to grow up in this family, Carol. Tell us a little bit about your childhood memories. You say you remember him. You remember Mooney Warther, your grandfather, there every day carving as people would come through the museum. And I
Yes.
recall that too. Tell us some of your memories of him.
As I was growing up, he was just Grandpa and Grandma. They weren't anything special to us. I mean, they were special to us, but not in the way they are to the public.
Yeah.
They were just family members. I mean, we did activities together. They'd go on hikes and walk out to our house, which was a couple-mile hike, and they did that every year.
He liked to teach you anything? Did he pass along any of his carving tricks? I know a lot of the Warther children know how to make the famous pliers.
That we all learned. That is about the only thing that he taught us, and he only taught you that when you come to him and say, I want to learn it. He didn't try to force anything on
Wow.
anyone. You had to be ready to do it on your own.
Okay, now for anyone who's not familiar with these, it's a one solid piece of wood. It
Correct.
starts as one solid piece of wood.
Yes.
Now tell us what you do to it to turn it into pliers.
You put 10 connecting cuts into it. They all have to meet at certain angles, and then it will open up. It's called a box joint.
It's remarkable, really. And he made this up himself?
No.
Okay, someone taught him?
A hobo gave him a pair of pliers when he was a little boy herding the cows, but the hobo didn't tell him how to do it. So his childhood imagination got to working on it, and he opened it. He figured out where to put all the cuts to make it work himself.
If that man ever knew what he started by being the person who gave Ernest Warther a little operating wooden piece of a wood that was actually a plier, that's
Yeah.
remarkable.
Yes.
Just amazing. Well, now, with only a second grade education, he obviously was a genius, Carol, am I right? I mean, my
Yes, he was
goodness.
considered an artistic genius as well as a mechanical genius. To be able to mechanize all the carvings, all of them, the wheels run in place, and then the steel mill, all the people are moving around and doing different jobs,
Yeah,
which was a talent in itself to mechanize it.
just amazing. And the fact that he's getting up in the middle of the night to do this is really remarkable. His wife, your grandmother, also had a very interesting hobby. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, she's collected buttons. She started as a young girl collecting them because in Europe the button box is passed down to the eldest daughter in the family. And so she was the eldest daughter and got her mother's buttons. But as the girls came to America, that was a European tradition that they didn't want to continue. So they started giving their button boxes away, and she started collecting them. So she has a lot of old buttons.
Okay, now, to the average listener here, okay, somebody had I've got a lot of buttons. In case I pop one, I've got, my little button collection. I can usually find something that will fit the bill.
Right.
But she didn't use these to replace anything that popped. She made these into amazing works of art, didn't she?
Yes, she laid them out in different geometrical and quilt-like designs, and she sorted them so each different pattern is certain types of buttons. Like she has one that she laid out in the shape of the Goodyear blimp, and those are rubber buttons that were made by Goodyear before they made tires. They made buttons.
Wow.
And then there's glass buttons and pearl buttons and metal and navy buttons.
And then these are all framed and displayed in some way?
Yes, they're all framed and displayed in the museum, in the button building at the museum. She has about 73,000 buttons in there.
My goodness. Oh, my gosh. All right. Well, now your father, I was familiar with your father as well. He kind of took the torch from your grandfather and operated the museum. And there was still, I'm remembering, a fascination with trains, even possibly with your dad. Wasn't there like a steam engine out in the front when you first arrived? Is that still there?
Yes, in our parking lot we have an engine, a small engine and a caboose.
And tell us a little bit about him. Tell us a little bit about your dad.
It was his idea to expand the museum and leave everything in one place instead of selling it off or having the Smithsonian take it to D.C. where it would have probably been broken up and not kept together. So it was his idea to create that and to expand on it.
So there was interest, was there, in the Smithsonian taking some of these works of art?
Yeah, the Smithsonian made Mooney an offer, and so did Henry Ford, for him to come to Dearborn and carve up in Michigan. And he didn't want to leave Dover. He said he'd just leave his carvings right here and people can come to Dover to see them.
And so your dad wanted to honor that, his
Yes.
request. And so everything is right here in our community for people to be able to see. Kind of remarkable, really, when you think about it.
Yes.
So cool. Well, now there's a special event coming up, the Lincoln Funeral Train. You're going to be doing something there. Tell us a little bit about that.
October 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, we'll be hosting a recreation of the original Lincoln Funeral Train car. The original car burned in 1911, and a man from Illinois, Dave Clokey, has rebuilt it exactly to the detail, and some of the original artifacts are in it that was in the original Lincoln car. The Lincoln car was designed to be a presidential car, similar to the Air Force One, that the president would travel around the country in it, and it was not quite finished when Lincoln was assassinated, so they quickly turned it into a funeral car, and it traveled from D.C. for 19 days till it went to Springfield, Illinois for his burial. They stopped in Cleveland and in Columbus and had big viewings there where, like in Columbus, they went to the State House, and then people came through there and viewed. And so my grandpa recarved that model. This is the 150th anniversary of Lincoln's assassination, and it's the 50th anniversary of Mooney finishing the carving of the Lincoln Funeral Train.
Wow.
So it all coincides together this year.
So cool. And when will this be taking place?
October 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and will be open to the public from 9 to 5 every day.
Okay. What are your normal hours?
9 to 5, 7
Okay.
days a week.
7 days a week.
Yes.
And what is the cost to visit the museum?
The normal admission is $13 for adults and $5 for students over 7 years old. For the Lincoln Funeral Train, you'll be able to view the funeral car without the museum at $5 for anyone over 5 years old. And if you want to do a combination of the museum and the train car, it will be $15 for adults and $7 for students.
Now, when you're going to see the car, though, are you going into the regular place that it's exhibited, or is it going to be moved to a different location for this particular viewing?
You mean our carving?
Yeah, your carving.
Our carving will stay in the museum. So to see that, you'd have to take the museum tour.
Yes.
And then the museum tour, when you take that as a combination ticket, then you'll get a fast pass into the Lincoln car.
So people are actually getting to see the real train that took the president's body.
Yeah. Well, it's a recreation.
Okay, yeah, I
Yeah,
understand. Okay.
The real thing.
Oh my gosh. All right. Do you have a website where folks can find out more, Carol?
Werthers.com is our regular website, and we also have a Facebook page which has more details on it about the Lincoln car coming.
Perfect. Well, we've been talking to Carol Warther Moreland. She is president and director of the Warther Museum. So much to see and do there. You just really, really have to take a day and take your family. And it's just so much fun. Carol, we can't thank you enough for being with us today.
And thank you for having me.
Thank you
enjoyed
for
it.
joining us. This is Susie Thomas, and you're listening to Our Community.